All right. Let's see, moving on to the first item on the agenda is status updates. Since I'm talking, I'll go ahead and throw mine out there. So I know from last meeting, I promised that I would take notes or write down some notes based on some of the input or feedback that was given on the docs. I went ahead and started that. I was finishing it up right before this meeting. Um, Also, that meeting is being uploaded to YouTube as you know per usual. So my train of thought is more or less tied to the last item that I added on the agenda, which has to do with the roadmap. There's a mention about docs and how all that could tie in, but we could discuss it a little bit more in that agenda item. Cool. Any other status updates?
I tried to add a couple of new pages on docs. There's a new stack, like creating a custom stack guide and under the operators guide now. Um, and yeah, that's it. I think one thing we've noticed in the past is whenever people make changes to some subsection, the subsequent like sections are not updated with the same piece of code. That leads to inconsistencies, and that has happened a couple of times where we pushed something onto the main branch, which was then inconsistent with the rest of the docs. So we should either figure out a way to detect that, or some easy way to like prevent the copy paste of code across different pages. But yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you want to maybe explore it as an agenda item? We could talk about it more.
Sure, I can look into some tools that, like I think last time you suggested something like Kata Code or something similar. Maybe we can look into tools that help write these sort of step-by-step tutorials in an easier fashion. Um,
Cool. Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah, if we could look around. I again personally didn't find anything too concrete, but yeah, I'm sure more eyes could probably do better. Cool. All right. Any other status updates? All right. Moving on to user research. We don't have anybody here to represent that topic, but I will kind of relay some information that I got yesterday. So it sounds like Natalie and Sam are kind of towards the completion of, I guess, ultimately what the initial ask was, which was a sort of report as the outcome for all the user research. I know that there's one workshop that they were still trying to finalize. I'm not entirely sure, whether or not that's going to actually happen, but I believe Sam is going to be joining us at one of the working group meetings, or at least speaking with the core team members in trying to figure out exactly how to either finalize that or pass it along to somebody else. I think he's running into some conflicts with availability. So more to come there, but there's definitely some traction and some outcomes coming up very soon. Any questions on user research? Cool. All right, moving on. Next one, unlabeled issues. I looked right before this meeting. I believe we don't have any, so that's good. Skip that. Tagging issues. This is a holdover from the previous meeting. Do we know who added this issue or sorry, this item and what we'd like to discuss here?
Is this in reference to tagging them for new contributors, or I can't remember, because I think that came up, but I don't remember if we actually talked about it a little bit or if it just kept getting moved down in the agenda.
Yeah, I think again, I have very little knowledge, but I feel like Yael was the one that might have added this, and since
Mm.
she's not here, I'm not sure if we could really speak to it.
Okay.
Cool. If you have some thoughts, right, like good first issues and stuff like that, we could definitely talk about that though.
Yeah, we already have that label, so maybe just people that are kind of combing through issues, just labeling things accordingly.
Yeah, I don't think we have a process for that, right? But I believe I've heard recently that like we just kind of, I guess, maybe an acknowledgement that we haven't been doing so good. So just need to figure out exactly, and not just within the docs, but throughout the entire project. We don't have enough good first issues for the community. So that's probably something that the maintainers should focus on,
Mhm.
which is kind of pointing the finger back at me, but whatever. Right, cool. Next, migrating missing specs to docs.
And that was something I added in the last meeting. So I think it also has to do with tagging issues, but we have a lot of issues like whenever there's some new RFC or spec or some updates to pack, someone creates an issue in docs. I think it would be nice to add them to like a milestone or some sort of a checklist so that we can track and work on it as a chunk. So I like as of right now, I don't know which which build pack API version we have documented everywhere, or like is it consistent across all the different guides? Similarly, like there are uh, like just some way to like collect all of the issues that we have in docs into some milestones so that we can iterate on them one by one rather than like picking them at random would be good. Um, and it would also help us identify if there are any missing issues from or missing documentation from specs that were put in but a subsequent issue for it was not created in the docs repository.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like a good idea. If it's okay, I'd like to maybe spend a little bit of time to provide some context based on, I believe, the first meeting we had in one of these things, which was around how this sub-team operates, right? And one of the things I just want to point out is like this sub-team, right? Like whether it be the contributors or maintainers, I guess we really are more like just simply facilitators for the docs, or for basically the docs repo, the website, and anything in relation to that. Our kind of working model is that we don't feel like we have all the knowledge and context from each individual like sub team, right? So whether it be the platform sub team, the implementation sub team, or the distribution sub team, we just wouldn't have enough knowledge to be able to provide the document, or to write the documents, write the guides and all that stuff for each one of those other individual teams. So we're kind of leaning on them to be able to provide those docs. So really it would be up to if we're talking about the Buildpack API, right? And whether the spec's up to date, it would be up to the implementation maintainers or sub team, I should say, to really make sure that that is well documented. And this team is really just more facilitating, the tools that we use for publishing the website, and maybe any like very general high level, getting started type of guides. Cool. So again, like I definitely agree that we should add milestones, and maybe that's something for tracking, but I think we should relay that information and that feedback back to each individual sub team. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Is there anything more on that? I know I just kind of honed in on one specific thing, but it sounds like you're talking about just general. There's maybe a bigger question.
uh, I think it was just like like I think currently I'm sort of divided between when to look at docs versus when to look at the spec itself. Um, so at which point should the users look at the API reference inside buildpacks.io versus when should they go to the spec repository and read that document there? Um, is there a distinction between the two? Like, and should we make it clear?
Yeah. I personally don't have any and like, quick and dirty answer to this because I feel like in order for that distinction to be made, right, we would have to be more in line with what is available. Almost like when you publish the spec, right, you would have all the docs already preset and published so that you could say that the docs would essentially be like a source of truth, right? When in reality, right now, the source of truth is the spec. And we use the docs website to kind of more or less make it simpler or simplify it for others to consume. But I think at the end of the day, the right solution would be to point them to the spec.
Okay.
For better or for worse, right? And I think if we want to change that, I think we'd really need to look at how to actually do that.
Yeah. Do you
Cool.
think it makes sense to just embed the spec and render it in the website rather than as a GitHub README?
My opinion is that the spec needs a lot of work for that to be user friendly.
Okay.
I don't know what your take on it is, but I think it's been improved over time, but I don't know that I think it's something that you could just put in, like a newcomer's,
Mhm.
face and be like, oh, do you understand this? Right? Like it's very terse language. It's like legal stuff, legal terminology. Then I'm not sure. Again, I think it goes back to last week's conversation about it really depends on the audience,
Yeah.
right? If it's somebody that's like very deep in the weeds and needs to know like precisely how everything operates, then yeah, they should be looking at the spec. But if we're trying to like maybe even just entice people to try it out, like we don't want to throw the spec at them, right? Like that would be kind of detrimental there.
Yeah.
So I think we should render it potentially, but it wouldn't be the first thing that they see, right? It would be something that maybe as we're running as they're reading through the doc, we could say for more information, click here, and then it takes them to that maybe section of the spec.
Yeah.
That's at least how I could foresee it. Cool. But again, good feedback. So appreciate it all. And it seems like docs is a pretty big focus, which I think kind of leads us to the next agenda item. I'll share my screen real quick. Oh, so much to see. Go away. All right. So as you may be aware, we are gathering some ideas for what will be in the roadmap for this year. And one of the things that Emily threw out here was just, this better documentation label, right? Which I think we could, and she does kind of speak to a lot of different small things or just different things that we could do. But going back to, again, last week's topic or conversation, what I want to do is maybe expand on this better documentation idea and throw it as a whole different discussion topic inside of, like the community discussions, where we could really pick apart everything and align it with the roadmap, since it seems like it's got a decent amount of votes and it seems like there's a lot of thought behind it. So ultimately, my thought would be that we add it onto the roadmap, or it gets added to the roadmap, and then we have a place, which is a discussion board, that would link to the meeting that we had last week, this meeting's recording, and then some notes, and we could just start throwing everything on there. And hopefully the outcome would be a much better presentation of our documentation. Does that kind of align with what everybody thinks would be a good strategy for getting this done.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. So I guess my only thing, my only ask would be obviously add your comments here and add them to the new discussion that it should be up there maybe in about 30 minutes or an hour, just to keep the traction going. All right, that brings us to the end of the agenda. Do we have anything else last minute? All right, if there's nothing else, I guess I'll see you all online.